Good morning.
Good morning.
Blessing of the Lord be upon you.
We bless you in the name of the Lord.
Thank you. Lesson number 21. The Book of Revelation. And we are continuing looking at, or really starting into the seven seals. Okay? And this is some of the stuff we looked at last week. We actually looked at the book of Daniel and some parts of Matthew 24 and made the relationship to what was going on with the seals, and particularly looked at Matthew 23, where Jesus is talking about how that God's wrath was going to come upon Jerusalem at that time. And even Paul's writings would talk about how that the Jews, if you look up there at the end of verse 14, how that the Jews had persecuted the church, not only their fellow Jews in Judea and Jerusalem who had become Christians, but had tried to stop the growth of the kingdom by forbidding Christians to teach the Gentiles. And what Paul says is that so as always to fill up the measure of their sins, that wrath has come upon them at last. And 1 Thessalonians, again, is probably one of the first books, first letters that the Apostle Paul writes. So we see that there is a rich amount of material where Jesus and his apostles are talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And what I want to go do this morning is relate that to Matthew chapter 24, verses 1 and 2. Now, probably be good to recall the end of Matthew chapter 23. Starting with verse 37, where after Jesus has talked about the scribes and Pharisees and introduced the woes upon them, he laments over Jerusalem. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it, how often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate." And their house, well, that's not just the temple, that's just not Jerusalem, that's like their way of life, their economy. "For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And again, he's talking, now that's more of a reflection of after his death, burial, and resurrection. And they're going to see him in the clouds in judgment. And that's what Matthew 24 is going to really tell us. So, we go to Matthew chapter 24. After Jesus has done this, he's introduced these woes on the Pharisees and the scribes, and really on all of the Jews. He talks about the destruction of Jerusalem. He laments it. Sorry that it has to happen, but that's the path that they have taken. And starting with verse 1, Matthew 24, Jesus left the temple and was going away. When his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, You see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. Again, immediately after proclaiming the destruction of Jerusalem, and we'll see later, it's going to be in that generation, his disciples want to know, when will this happen? When will this occur? So he begins to tell them in verse 3. And in my English Standard Version on my Olive Tree app, it says here, signs of the end of the age. Now you can take that in one of two ways, can't you? If you're not careful. The end of what age? Well, you have the Mosaic age, you have the Christian age, you have the patriarchal age, which runs concurrently with the Mosaic age. If Jesus, how do I want to put this? If this was really talking about the end of the world, wouldn't it say the end of the ages? Because the end of the world, the ages of the world, that's where it would be, the end of the ages. But he's talking about the end of the age. So listen, that's not a part of the Bible, the little title there that men give to it, because when men look at things, they will use their biases. Am I going to use my bias? Yes, I'm going to use my bias. I'm going to use my bias that when we go down through here, you're going to see that this is about the destruction of Jerusalem. Matthew 24. All right? As he sat on the Mount of Olives, verse 3, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when will these things be? Well, what things?
The destruction he's talking about.
The destruction of the temple, when no stone will be left on the other. Okay? When will that be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Now, there are actually three questions there talking about two different events. Now, how do you split those up? Well, let's think about it this way. All right? When will these things be, and when will be the sign of your coming? And when will be the sign of your coming in the end of the age? But let's put an S on there, the end of the ages. And why would I say that? I should have looked it up to see if that was a plural in the Greek, because how does Jesus answer them? He answers them by saying, well, here are the signs that are going to accompany the destruction of Jerusalem, but when we're talking about the end of the ages, there are no signs. I'm going to come like a thief in the night. So he answers two questions. He gives two answers out of these three questions, but you can see how there would be kind of a doubling of what are the signs. All right, so let's move on. Verse 4. And Jesus answered them, See that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed. For this must take place, but the end is not yet. Can I ask you a question? Who's he talking to? He's talking to his disciples, the ones who asked him the question. He's telling them what? Don't be alarmed. Is he talking to us? He's not talking to us. Who asked him the question? His disciples. Who's he talking to? He's talking to his disciples. That's historical. Is there anything typical for us? Well, yeah. Should we be alarmed about things happening in society? Not really. We should have the hope of Christ, but see, he's not talking directly to us at that time. Do you catch the drift of what I'm talking about? He's not saying, hey, you don't be alarmed because these things are going to happen 20 centuries later. He says they're going to happen in your generation, but don't be alarmed about it. Because I'm going to tell you how you get to escape. Escape what? The destruction of Jerusalem. Does that make sense? All right. But there are going to be people coming saying, I am the Christ. Now we'll deal with that in a little while. Verse 7, end of verse 6, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of birth pains. All right? A woman goes into labor, right? And boom, there's the baby. Now, it takes a little while. You have the birth pains, and the woman says, get me to the doctor! Get me to the hospital! Well, maybe not in that fashion. But, yeah, there's a little bit of time. Yeah, things have to progress. Things have to change a little bit. And that's what Jesus is saying here. Why would many come claiming to be Christ? That's a question. Because he came and he is the Christ, but what happens to him?
He's ignored. Not.
Well, something else happens to him.
He's also killed.
He's crucified and he's buried. Now, he rises again, but who are the witnesses to that? His disciples. Everybody doesn't know it. And they witness it and they tell people about it, but people don't believe him. Believe them. The ones who believe, there's a change in their lives, but the ones that don't believe, they're still out there saying, I'm the Messiah. Because what is the Jewish perception of the Messiah? An earthly king who's going to do what?
He's going to reign on earth.
Well, he's going to do something before he can reign, really. He's going to get an army together, and he's going to
Conquer?
drive out the Romans. Yeah, conquer not necessarily conquer the Romans, but at least drive them out. That was their perception of Messiah. And then he could reign in Jerusalem on whose throne? David's throne. A literal throne of David in Jerusalem, but we know from Acts chapter 2, that's in heaven where Jesus is reigning. All right? So, signs include normal worldly activities. The first Jewish war against Rome, starting about AD 64, would set off an apocalyptic cascade of events that would be directed at the Jewish people and overflow to affect the church, which is seen as a sect of Judaism by the Romans. Why were the Christians persecuted? They just saw them as Jews. Saw them as the enemy. You're trying to overthrow Rome. You can't do that. No, no, we're not. And that's why it's so important that when you look at Paul, when Luke, if Luke is writing a defense of Christianity to get Paul off the first time, well, that's wonderful. And maybe in the same sense, Mark is writing a defense of Christianity to try to get Peter off so he's not martyred. But they are martyred. But wars and rumors of wars, that's going to happen, and many coming to present themselves as the Christ. You know, we're the leaders because Christ is in heaven. You don't see him. Okay? It's easy for someone to say, hey, I'm going to drive them out. Come join my group. So, verse 9. And they will deliver you. Who's you?
Disciples.
The disciples. They will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death. Did that happen? Well, yeah. Think about James in Acts chapter 12. Then you go on, you think about Peter, crucified upside down. How many other of the apostles in particular are persecuted and martyred? And you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. All nations. Why all nations? What is typified by all nations?
The world.
Okay, and in particular their time, what would that be?
The Jewish.
The Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was a conglomerate of all the nations. There were kings all over the place, but the emperor ruled. So they'd be hated by all nations. Verse 10, and many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. Well, what's the book of Hebrews about? It's about Christians wanting to apostatize and go back to Judaism. No, Judaism's going to be destroyed. You don't want to go back there. Because Judaism was a legal, licit religion in Rome up to the time when they rebelled, and Christianity was always an illegal religion until when? Till 312, AD 312, and Constantine made it a legal religion. We've got to remember those differences. Verse 11. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, in verse 10, they'll fall away, betray one another, hate one another. Verse 11, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. Well, look at the letters, right? What does Paul talk about? Some preaching a different gospel. John, read the book of the 3 letters of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, especially 2nd and 3rd. Hey, there's this guy, he likes to lord it over everybody. Can't have that. I'll take care of him when I get there. These things were happening. Verse 12. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. Well, what kind of lawlessness? How about the rebellion of the Jews against Roman Empire? What did Jesus teach about the Roman government? Pay your taxes. when he talks about compels you to go 1 mile with him, go 2. Well, what does that refer to? Do you know? What's a specific reference of that? If a Roman soldier came to you as a Jew and said, "Hey, bub, carry my pack," you had to carry that pack for 1 mile. And Jesus said, if he tells you to do it for 1 mile, do it for 2. Go the extra mile. To a Roman soldier? For a Roman soldier? Now imagine a Roman hearing that. That's what Christians are supposed to do. That's how they're supposed to act. And look at what Paul talks about the Romans. Pray for them. Honor the emperor, the king. Christians weren't against the government. But there were a lot of Jews, and we talked about it when we were discussing the intertestamental period, right? And Josephus, it's foolish to fight against the Roman Empire. We're going to do it anyway. Yeah. Okay. Because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. The one who remains faithful to Christ and remembers the teachings about what? About what's going to happen will be saved. Is that eternal salvation being talked about there? I don't think that's what's on their mind. What's on their mind is the destruction of Jerusalem, first and foremost. Right? Verse 14. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Okay? So to them, that, again, to them, what does the whole world mean?
All those that are saved.
When he says the gospel of the kingdom will preach to the whole world, what does he mean? The whole world. What would they understand that to be?
Jews, Gentiles, everyone.
Are you back to the Roman Empire?
The Roman Empire. Everything else was barbarian. There you go. And isn't that the case? Isn't that what happened? Because tradition says that Paul even went to Spain. And there are traditions that talk about Christianity going to England and to Ireland in those time periods. The Christians went everywhere spreading the gospel, but where did they go, typically? Throughout the Roman Empire. So, and you can find, there's Colossians chapter 1:23, verse 23. The gospel would first be preached to the whole Roman Empire before the destruction of Jerusalem would take place. But there's one place. The message had gone out to the whole world. So then the end would come. Once the gospel got out to all the Roman Empire, that would be the way that they would understand it. Then the end would come. The end of what? The end of the age. What's the end of the age? The end of the Mosaic. The end of Jerusalem and the temple. Okay. Any questions on that? What's the matter?
Nothing.
Nothing? Now you get into verse 15, you get into the abomination of desolation. And this is where Jesus connects the destruction of Jerusalem with Daniel's prophecy. How many times have I brought up Daniel's prophecy? You know what? I'm going to do it again. What? Redundancy. Yeah. What does Peter says? I told you this, you know it, but I'm going to put it in your remembrance. You know, I'm going to remind you because this is so important. All right? The abomination of desolation. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet of Daniel, stop there for a moment. You read some commentaries on the book of Daniel, and they'll tell you that this abomination of desolation happened back at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Remember when we talked about him in the intertestamental period? They'll say that's what this refers to. What does Jesus say? When's it going to happen? At the time of Antiochus Epiphanes? So whose word are we going to take? Whose truth are we going to accept? Whose teaching are we going to accept? Men's teaching or Jesus' teaching? Jesus' teaching. Jesus said, right there, okay? When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, they're going to see it in their generation. It's not something that happened a couple hundred years earlier. Is that important? Why can't scholars see that? I can see it, and I'm as dumb as a post. But I can see that. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand the holy place. What's the holy place? The temple. But wait a minute, the temple where the buyers and the sellers were and where they had the animals in there pooping all over the place? Oh, I'm sorry. Defecating all over. And noisy and all that. You know, my house is supposed to be a house of prayer, but you've turned it into a
Den of thieves. Den of thieves.
den of thieves. That holy place comes back to that discussion we've had. Yes, it was sanctified. It was set apart for God's use, but they weren't doing it right. The word for holy can be a noun and it can be an adjective. Okay? Here, it was holy. It was set apart for God's use. But as an adjective, it was unholy. That's why it's going to be destroyed. All right. Verse 16. But when you see that, is he talking to us? When we see the abomination of desolation that was spoken of by Daniel, he's not talking to us. He's talking to those disciples at that time. When you see it, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Not just Jerusalem, but all of Judea. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house, and let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas, for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days. Yeah, you gotta run, but you're 9 months pregnant. Ladies, how would you like that? You got a child to nurse. You gotta run. How would you like that? Verse 20, pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. Why not in the winter?
There'd be no place to be kept warm or.
The elements are bad. And how about the Sabbath?
You're not supposed to travel on the Sabbath.
You're not supposed to go more than a Sabbath day's journey. And where are you going to get food? All the McDonald's are closed.
No, they would have to fix their food day before the Sabbath because they wouldn't be allowed to cook on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Jeremy's got something to say.
McDonald's didn't exist back then.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Way to go, Jeremy. Good job.
Okay. You're right. You're right. But you can see the context of it. All right? Tribulation, hard time. Verse 21, for there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now. Until when? Now, that time period. No, and never will be. Is that for us? Is that for some time in the future? No, it's for then. Tribulation. Imagine this. How do you think the people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki reacted when the United States hit them with atomic bombs at the end of World War II, to end World War II?
Scared to death. I mean,
Their whole world was turned upside down. Pearl Harbor, if you lived in Hawaii during Pearl Harbor, man, we could even, World Trade Center, our world was turned upside down. You're talking about things that happened, but those people lived through 4 years, 4.5 years of trials and tribulations until finally, boom, it's destroyed. Their lives are totally upset. That's the Great Tribulation. Verse 22, and in those days, if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. If it had not been cut short, what cut it short? Here you are, you're a Christian in Jerusalem, you've been persecuted, now the Romans are there and they're doing terrible things, but if those days hadn't been cut short, what happened? Titus comes in, offers the abomination of desolation, goes out, pulls his army back. When you see the abomination of desolation where it shouldn't be, what are you supposed to do? Run. Christians who knew that prophecy by Jesus, what did they do? They ran, and they were saved. Eternally? Not necessarily, but from the destruction of Jerusalem. Catching the point? Read it historically. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Who are the elect?
The kings and their entourage, so to speak.
Those that ran. Those that ran.
Well, Christians.
Christians,
The Christians. The ones who believed and obeyed the gospel, and now we're holding to the teachings of Jesus. And remember this, because this is going to be preached to them by the apostles and by the disciples. Verse 23, then if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, because what was said earlier, many will come proclaiming to be the Christ and be false prophets, right? Look, here's the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform, look, they're going to perform great signs and wonders so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. That's got to be Christians. Verse 25, see, I have told you beforehand. Before this takes place, I've told you. So if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. Jesus is back. He's down in the wilderness where he was with John. No. He's not coming back physically to this earth. He's not coming back physically to this earth. He's coming in the clouds, and every eye will see him. He's not coming back to this earth to set up his kingdom. He's set up his kingdom. He's not coming here for an earthly kingdom of 1,000 years. If they say, look, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. That's how he's going to come. Verse 28, wherever the corpse is, there will the vultures be. What's a corpse?
Body.
A dead body. What feeds on dead bodies?
Vultures.
Vultures. Okay? So, what dead body is Jesus talking about here?
The temple.
The false teachers.
Not the Roman Empire.
The Romans.
The Romans are the vultures.
The Jews.
Jews, Jerusalem, the temple, Judaism, that's the corpse. That's the dead spiritual body that refused to accept Jesus as the Messiah, the Christ. And the vultures, the animal or the emblem of Rome was an eagle. But an eagle doesn't feast on dead animals, does it? In essence, it'll swoop down and grab a fish out of a lake, it'll kill another animal, eat it, but a vulture, it'll eat a rotten old whatever out beside the road. the Roman Empire was like the Babylonians of 586, God used Jerusalem. He wasn't totally pleased with them, but judgment begins at the household of God. It's what Peter says, right? Peter's writing. Judgment begins at the household of God, and if it begins with us, what shall be the outcome or fate of those who do not obey the gospel of Jesus Christ?
Could you say that the corpse would be those who rejected and everything associated with them?
Well, it's figurative language for the Jewish economy. When we say Jerusalem is destroyed, you're talking about everything in Judaism. If Washington was destroyed, would the United States be destroyed? Well, to a degree, yes. Because we talk about Moscow, right? What happens if you destroy Moscow? The economy, the culture, everything basically of Russia is destroyed. Now, yeah, there are elements, there are people, and there are but yet it's basically destroyed. Again, figurative language. All right. Now, verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days. What days?
Destruction of Jerusalem.
Okay. In that time period, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign, signification of the Son of Man. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. Well, what are the tribes of the earth? In their thought, Jewish thought, you're talking about the 12 tribes of Israel. And we'll see that when we get to Revelation chapter 7. Okay? And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. They will see it. Do you see what I'm talking about? Do you see what I'm talking about? You actually saw it? Or do you understand? This is an important point. They will see the Son of Man, what? Coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Is it that they will actually see Jesus in the clouds, which typifies his second coming? Or when Jerusalem is destroyed, they will understand that this is God's judgment on Jerusalem and Judea and that old system. You see what I'm saying? And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from what? The four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Again, we'll discuss that when we get to Revelation chapter 7. me? Trust me. So this is apocalyptic messaging of the destruction of a kingdom or nation, that is Israel. Because of the prophecies, the world will see that the destruction of Jerusalem was truly a judgment of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, against Israel. He gathers his elect in his kingdom. Revelation chapter 7, hold back the four winds until the elect, or they're sealed. And who are sealed in Revelation chapter 7? Well, it's 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. We'll discuss it more in depth, but Ephraim and Dan are excluded. Joseph and Levi are put in. So the idolatrous tribes are excluded there. So it's the faithful. What faithful? Those are the ones who believe and obey the gospel from Jews. And here's the question we'll actually talk about when we get there. Was there ever a time when the church was totally made up of Jews? Converted Jews, ethnic Jews?
No.
From Pentecost till the time when Cornelius comes into the church, it's all Jews. Or proselytes to Judaism. 3.5 years. Which is what?
Jesus.
42 months. 42 months, 1,260 days. How many times we see that in Scripture? The church was totally made up of Jews until the first Gentile convert, right?
The church.
The church. I can prove it.
Church was near non-existent. Never mind. I can't follow your train of thought. And it's way too big to start on now at this time.
We will talk about it later.
You know, you're talking figuratively, and then you shift
The figurative
to a
is based on
modern
the
time.
literal.
You know, this is all to us as the same as it was to them. That's why they're carefully
Historically.
learning through the figurative language.
There are principles from it. There are principles from it.
But you can't say that it's not for us.
But historically it's not.
It's how you,
If Jesus said there never will be a tribulation like that again, how can premillennialists say there's going to be a great tribulation later that's going to be greater? Either they're lying or Jesus is lying.
oh no, that's so you're not following me now, so let's just move on. This is, let's just move on.
We'll deal more with the church deal about Jews, the church being totally made up of Jews. When we get to Revelation chapter 7. Okay. All right. So, let's see. So verse 32 of Matthew 24. from the fig tree, learn this lesson, its lesson. This is what Jesus is teaching. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, when who sees all these things? His disciples, who have asked him this question. About what? First question, destruction of Jerusalem. When you see all these things, you will know that he is near, at the very gate. That who is near? The Son of Man. He's near, at the very gates. Truly I say to you, what? This generation will not pass away until all these things take place. What generation? Our generation?
Generation of that time.
40 years. Within 40 years, or about 40 years of the time that Jesus is speaking that, those things were going to take place. That's historical. That's not for our time. It's not for our generation. Unless what? Unless Jesus is a false prophet and a false teacher, or he's trying to deceive us. Verse 35, heaven and earth will pass away. And that's just a phrase. We see that in the Sermon on the Mount, don't we? Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. It's like written in stone. The stone will eventually pass away, won't it? Why won't his words pass away? Because he's God. And he isn't going to pass away. Now, he's going to die as a human being, but not as God. So, Matthew 16, 1 through 4, Jesus chided the Pharisees and Sadducees for understanding the signs of the times, of the seasons, but failing to understand the signs of the times, of the time. Jesus is explaining to his disciples to believe and teach the new converts about these signs, especially those in Jerusalem and Judea. Why? Because the impending judgment and destruction would take place in that generation within 40 years. So Jesus' words on this would not be circumvented. No amount of prayer, no amount of confession, no amount of repentance, though perhaps bringing spiritual salvation to the individual, would spare the temple, Jerusalem, or the nation of Israel. Follow me? Nothing was going to change the fate within 40 years, or about 40 years. Those things were going to be destroyed. But you can save yourself physically by knowing the signs, running, and they could save themselves spiritually by becoming a part of the kingdom of God, by hearing and obeying the gospel, and then living faithfully unto death. So that's, I really wanted to get to this chart. What does it look like? Okay. We'll start here next week, Lord willing, if you don't fire me for it. I know, it's been a long day already. And this just chart, you can find this on the internet. I picked this out because it's got some good pictures, okay? We'll talk about these. We're going to go start through the 7 seals next week, Lord willing. But you see what's happening. The white horse, the red horse, the black horse, the pale horse, 4 horsemen. Remember back in Zechariah, you had 4 horses, and you know, you get to it and you come over here, and then when you get to Revelation chapter 7, hold up the 4 winds. Don't let this happen until something else happens. Okay? Okay, this is going to happen, and then these are going to happen. It's kind of like I told you about the stream of consciousness that's throughout the book of Revelation. Goes her way, and then suddenly it drops back and tells a little story, and then moves forward, and then drops back and tells some more of the story. We'll get into this. All right. Questions or comments? Hey, if it's fresh on your mind, now's a good time. I'm serious. I'm serious. No better time.
I'm good.
Okay. All right. Love y'all.
Love you.